On reasons for withdrawing from the world. 1. I confess that we all have an inborn affection for our body. I confess that we are entrusted with its guardianship. I do not maintain that the body is not to be indulged at all, but I maintain that we must not be slaves to it. He will have many masters who makes his body his master, who is over fearful on its behalf, who judges everything according to the body. We should conduct ourselves not as we ought to live for the body, but as if we could not live without it. Our too great love for it makes us restless with fears, burdens us with cares, and exposes us to insults. Virtue is held too cheap by the man who counts his body too dear. We should cherish the body with the greatest care, but we should also be prepared when reason, self-respect, and duty demand the sacrifice to deliver it even to the flames. 3. Let us, however, insofar as we can, avoid discomforts as well as dangers, and withdraw to safe ground by thinking continually how we may repel all objects of fear. If I am not mistaken, there are 3 main classes of these. We fear want, we fear sickness, we fear the troubles which result from the violence of the stronger. 4. And of all these, that which shakes us most is the dread which hangs over us from our neighbor's ascendancy, for it is accompanied by great outcry and uproar. But the natural evils which I have mentioned, want and sickness, steal upon us silently with no shock of terror to the eye or to the ear. The other kind of evil comes, so to speak, in the form of a huge parade, surrounding it with a retinue of swords and fire and chains and a mob of beasts to be let loose upon the disemboweled entrails of men. 5. Picture to yourself under this head the prison, the cross, the rack, the hook, and the stake which they drive straight through a man until it protrudes from his throat. Think of human limbs torn apart by chariots driven in opposite directions, of the terrible shirt smeared with interwoven and inflammable materials, and of all the other contrivances devised by cruelty, in addition to those which we have mentioned. 6. It is not surprising then if our greatest terror is of such a fate, for it comes in many shapes and its paraphernalia are terrifying. For just as the torturer accomplishes more in proportion to the number of instruments which he displays, indeed, the spectacle overcomes those who would have patiently withstood the suffering. Similarly, of all the agencies which coerce and master our minds, the most effective are those which can make a display. Those other troubles are, of course, not less serious. I mean hunger, thirst, ulcers of the stomach, and fevers that parches our very bowels. They are, however, secret. They have no bluster and no heralding. But these, like huge arrays of war, prevail by virtue of their display and their equipment. 7. Let us therefore see to it that we abstain from giving offense. It is sometimes the people that we ought to fear or sometimes a body of influential oligarchs in the Senate, if the method of governing the state is such that most of the business is done by that body, and sometimes individuals equipped with the power by the people and against the people, it is burdensome to keep the friendship of such persons. It is enough not to make enemies of them. So the wise man will never provoke the anger of those in power. Nay, he will even turn his course precisely as he would turn from a storm if he were steering a ship. 8. When you travel to Sicily, you cross the straits. The reckless pilot scorned the blustering south wind, the wind which roughens the Sicilian sea and forces it into choppy currents. He sought not the shore on the left, but the strand hard by the place where chariot, I don't know how to read that. I can't even see. Throws the seas into confusion. Your more careful pilot, however, questions those who know the locality as to the tides and the meaning of the clouds, and he holds his course far from the region notorious for the swirling waters. Our wise man does the same. He shuns the strong men who may be injurious to him, making a point of not seeming to avoid him, because an important part of one's safety lies in not seeking safety openly. For what one avoids, one condemns. 9. We should therefore look about us and see how we may protect ourselves from the mob. And first of all, we should have no cravings like theirs, for rivalry results in strife. Again, let us possess nothing that can be snatched from us to the great profit of a plotting foe. Let there be as little booty as possible on your person. No one sets out to shed the blood of his fellow men for the sake of bloodshed. At any rate, very few. More murderers speculate on their profits than give vent to hatred. If you are empty-handed, the highwayman passes you by. Even along an infested road, the poor man may travel in peace. 10. Next, we must follow the old adage and avoid 3 things with special care: hatred, jealousy, and scorn. And wisdom alone can show you how this may be done. It is hard to observe a mean. We must be chary of letting the fear of jealousy lead us into becoming objects of scorn, lest when we choose not to stamp others down, we let them think that they can stamp on us. The power to inspire fear has caused many men to be in fear. Let us withdraw ourselves in every way, for it is as harmful to be scorned as it is to be admired. One must therefore take refuge in 11. One must therefore take refuge in philosophy, in pursuit not only in the eyes of good men, but also in the eyes of those who are even moderately bad, is a sort of protecting emblem. For speech-making at the bar or any other pursuit that claims the people's attention wins enemies for a man. But philosophy is peaceful and minds her own business. Men cannot scorn her. She is honored by every profession, even the vilest among them. Evil can never grow so strong, and nobility of character can never be so plotted against that the name of philosophy shall cease to be worshipped worshipful and sacred. Philosophy itself, however, should be practiced with calmness and moderation. 12. Very well then, you retort. Do you regard philosophy of Marcus Cato as moderate? Cato's voice strove to check a civil war. Cato parted the swords of the maddened chieftains. When some fell foul of Pompey and others fell foul of Caesar, Cato defied both parties at once. 13. Nevertheless, one may well question whether in those days a wise man ought to have taken any part in public affairs, and ask, what do you mean, Marcus Cato? It is not now a question of freedom. Long since has freedom gone to rack and ruin. The question is whether it is Caesar or Pompey who controls the state. Why, Cato, should you take sides in that dispute? It is no business of yours. A tyrant is being selected. What does it concern you who conquers? The better man may win, but the winner is bound to be the worse man. I have referred to Cato's final role, but even in the previous years, the wise man was not permitted to intervene in such plundering of the state. For what would Cato do but raise his voice and utter unavailing words? At one time, he was hustled by the mob and spat upon and forcibly removed from the forum and marked for exile. At another, he was taken straight to prison from the Senate chamber. However, 14. However, we shall consider later whether the wise man ought to give his attention to politics. Meanwhile, I beg you to consider those Stoics who, shut out from public life, have withdrawn into privacy for the purpose of improving man's existence and framing laws for human race without incurring the displeasure of those in power. The wise man will not upset the customs of the people, nor will he invite attention of the populace by any novel ways of living. 15. What then? Can one who follows out this plan be safe in any case? I cannot guarantee you this any more than I can guarantee good health in the case of a man who observes moderation. Although, as a matter of fact, good health results from such moderation. Sometimes a vessel perishes in the harbor, but what do you think happens on the open sea? And how much more beset with danger that man would be, who even in his leisure is not secure. If he were busily working at many things, innocent persons sometimes perish. Who would deny that? But the guilty perish more frequently. A soldier's skill is not at fault if he receives the death blow through his armor. 16. And finally, the wise man regards the reason of all his actions, but not the results. The beginning is in our own power. Fortune decides the issue, but I do not allow her to pass sentence upon myself. You may say, but she can inflict a measure of suffering and of trouble. The highwayman does not pass sentence when he slays. 17. Now you are stretching forth your hand for the daily gift. Golden indeed will be the gift with which I shall load you. And inasmuch as we have mentioned gold, let me tell you how its use and enjoyment may bring you greater pleasure. He who needs riches least enjoys riches most. Author's name, please, you say. Now, to show you how generous I am, it is my intent to praise the dicta of other schools. The phrase belongs to Epicurus or Metrodorus, or someone of that particular thinking shop. 18. But what difference does it make who spoke those words? They were uttered for the world. He who craves riches feels fear on their account. No man, however, enjoys a blessing that brings anxiety, and he is always trying to add a little more. While he puzzles over increasing his wealth, he forgets how to use it. He collects his accounts and he wears out the pavement in the forum. He turns over his ledger. In short, he ceases to be master and becomes a steward. Farewell.
Thank you very, very much for reading that. That was quite long, 17 passages. So, and it was read beautifully. So thank you, Mana. So now we will open it up for comments. You can type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom to share your takeaways from this Letters to Lucilius 14. And let's see, I have Evanique.
All right. So one of the things I wrote down the particular passages that struck me. So the first one was passage 10. Next, we must follow the old adage and avoid three things with special care: hatred, jealousy, and scorn. And wisdom alone can show you how this may be done. I think I like that one because, you know, it says here with special care, because these are the things that I think can sneak up on you: hatred, jealousy, and scorn. These are one of the things that you don't expect. It just hits you, and sometimes it's like you don't know why you hate a particular person, or you're jealous of someone, or you have scorn for them. And then you have to evaluate it. And it says, and wisdom alone can show you how this may be done. And I think when he talks about wisdom here, he shows you what is it in you that has you hate the other person if you're listening to wisdom. Wisdom is talked about across so many different areas or philosophies that it's one of those common things where if you have wisdom, you'll have those emotions, but you can avoid acting on them. And I think that's the key, is that we may have them, but we may avoid acting on them. And then we can self-evaluate and see where it's coming from. So I did like that passage. And then another one was 11. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. It says here at the last part, it says, philosophy itself, however, should be practiced with calmness and moderation. And above, it talks about how, how great philosophy is, but you got to have the calmness and moderation. Because if you don't, I think sometimes when people talk about philosophy, it can become a little arrogant and a little self-righteous in a sense. And I think that's why there's a warning here by Seneca to approach it with calmness and moderation, because if you do, you can I think philosophy is supposed to be applied to like real life situations. It's not meant to be highbrow. I think it's meant to be to help you lead a good life and to help you apply it. To apply it in certain situations. And I think if you can't, then is the philosophy really true? So, and then just the last part, which was 15, where it talks about, where he goes into innocence and guilt, and he says, yeah, sometimes innocent men do suffer, of course, for no good reason. But more times than not, the guilty suffer more. And I think that's true only because I think if you're doing something that you know is wrong, that goes against your conscience, you got to deal with yourself. And I think, also it is one of those things where you feel like even inside of yourself, if you're guilty of something, you're kind of getting what you deserve when something bad happens. Whereas, it is hard to see an innocent person have bad things happen to them, but sometimes that's just circumstance, and it doesn't negate that the guilty kind of brings it on themselves, whereas the innocent can at least look at it and say, well, this is something that happened because life is life, and sometimes bad things happen in life. Whereas the guilty haven't added, um, they haven't added uh, pressure or, added, burden, because they know it was because of their actions that this is happening to them. So those were just my initial thoughts.
Thank you very much. We have Maritza, followed by Carly.
Hi. So this passage is interesting because there are times when some of the things I was reading, I was like, I don't know if I agree with that. And then further on, you're like, okay, I see the point, grudgingly, because some of the things you don't necessarily want to agree with. One passage that really stood out to me is we should therefore look about us and see how we may protect ourselves from the mob. And first of all, we should have no cravings like theirs, for rivalry results in strife. Again, let us possess nothing that can be snatched from us to the great profit of a plotting foe. So this is, the cautionary tale of being influenced by people of others, like others and the world in general. And the idea of, if you're always with an eye towards wanting what your neighbor has, then you don't ever have the opportunity to appreciate what you yourself have. That's kind of what I was seeing in this one, the idea of, where it's not a matter of never interacting with things, but not to interact with, I think, and further down, he also says, he says, let me look at some of my notes here. He talks about above all, avoiding, I think he said jealousy, and there were 3 of them, but there were like those things that we feel when we're feeling covetous, as it were. So I really like the way that he pointed out to us that it's a matter of like there's so many things that we don't necessarily need, but in our misplaced emotional reactions to others and the outside world, we somehow become convinced that this is a need, and then that skews everything within us. That's kind of what I was hearing him saying with that passage. And I think it's something we always have to consider. I like that. So, and looking at a couple other, and this was such a long passage. Another one I really liked was the wise man will not upset the customs of the people, nor will he invite the attention of the populace by any novel ways of living. And I feel like that almost goes hand in hand, right, with the previous one of, if you're not coveting your neighbor's stuff, you're also not making yourself someone that would incite that same, coveting, as it were, in others. Like you're not making yourself stand out. And I think it's the idea here is of putting on airs. Like if we are living, true and kind of within your means, as it were, there's no need for showiness. And I like the way it's phrased, because he's not specifically saying you don't need any jewels. He's saying if you take stock of what you have, invariably, you may consider that you don't need as much as you were initially thinking. And I mean, in the whole passage, this is a very long passage, it really interweaves all of these tendrils. And like I said, as I was reading it, I kept feeling this like almost dissonance of, oh, I don't agree with that. And then he goes on and he spells it out for you. And you're like, oh crap, I see his point. I have to agree with that. I'm not sure I like it, but I as a reasoning person, right, I understand what he's saying and where he's getting at, and I see the value there. So I like the and the idea here of I think it's in that same section for that reading where he talks about us communion. In some way, he talks about the nature aspect of it being like, I guess it's along the lines of he who needs riches least enjoys riches most. It brings about the idea of, you can find this calm in a setting that isn't filled with those things that are like materials, as it were. I think that's where he's getting at there. After saying that, he says he equates craving riches with fear that we're feeling on the account of the riches. And it's so true. Years and years ago, I had a girlfriend of mine who came from El Salvador. Her family came from El Salvador, and they came over in a time when it was doing all of the wars over there, and it was very much a third world country. And she said, you don't understand. When we came here, we had previously not realized that this could possibly be reality. We saw some of this on television and thought this was fantasy world. I mean, my people used newspaper as toilet paper, that as she explained it to me. And she said, so when we came here, everything was so grandiose and so very much felt like we had stepped into the TV screen. And then you fast forward 20 years and the same person is like, oh, well, I couldn't possibly not have this brand purse or this brand car. And she goes, sometimes I miss home, not because I ever actually truly miss home itself, but I miss the pleasure that we got from the simplest things. You didn't know that you needed to have, like whatever product, this, that, or the third. And so you felt zero discontent at not having it. But now here, I understand in her world, she was saying that in her circles, she feels the need for these trappings to show whatever status symbol she wants to show. And reading this section from Seneca, it made me think of that, the idea of the more we have and we amass, the more almost discontent. And then the more you have to, you get the bigger house, you need the more alarm system. And because now you want to protect those things. And I've made jokes that I hope nobody ever breaks into my house, because I feel like they would trash the place just in anger because they wouldn't find but so much steel that was of value. This passage makes me feel better about that. I'm okay with that. Maybe I'm not so married to my material things if I can still say that and laugh, right? So it's he who needs riches least enjoys riches most. It's such a powerful statement, because it's like, if we're content and present and satisfied, and then we get a little bit more, we're going to feel so much more pleasure and so much more gratitude than if we have all of this and then we just keep thinking we need more. The bar is too high, so you can't reach an equilibrium. And that's kind of what I was thinking when I thought of that. And I'm just gonna go ahead and stop there. Thanks, John.
Thanks. Thank you for your comments, Maritza. Next up, we have, why don't we go with Carly next, and then Mona, and then we'll go back to Angela and then Penny.
Thank you. I have a ton of notes for this chapter because it is one of the longer ones. And a lot of really good knowledge in here. Only a few things that were really quotable initially. I'll just start at, I guess, the beginning with for everybody's sake. The relationship with the body, I think, is really fascinating for the Stoics. It is, yes, about the physical body, which is to be used, and that virtue is in using this, being of service, and every now and then again demands sacrifice. But also the Stoics equated the body to the emotions, like in previous chapters talking about like blushing and showing modesty and whatnot. There are reactions to the body which are natural, and that we should not be slaves to those. And so part of those emotions both speakers touched on is the moderation and being aware of our emotions so that they don't trap us, basically. The possessing nothing which can't be snatched from us is also part of that. Is that the idea that I got from, I'm not sure which number in this chapter, about, I think it was 6. Greatest terrors, such a fate, many shapes. About torturing ourselves with emotions, but also that which is our actions, the choices, seem to be what it is we have agency over, and that the end result is not up to us. So when he speaks about wisdom, it's about doing something with reason in mind, but not being attached to the outcome particularly. And one starts naturally with reason for all things, but as one gets actually more wise and equates also older in body and time and wisdom and being a better Stoic, as to having these sort of second nature. You are with nature.
And Carly, we're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you, but at least I am. Could you speak closer to the mic?
Yeah, I think my microphone is off. Let me log on and log back in. Go ahead and continue without me. I'll try to get that situated. Thanks.
Okay, with that, we'll go to Mona.
For me now?
Yes, yes.
I was thinking about why is this letter called Reasons from Withdrawing from the World? And it struck me that he brings up the body and the pains of the body, and he says we should be concerned about it, but not overly concerned, and be wise about venturing into the world, and especially as far as venturing with opinions and our full selves. And then he brings up again the issue of not of fearing upsetting the people in power. And it occurred to me that that was the most important reasons for why we want to withdraw from the world, in order to maintain integrity, because in isolation one could still think and produce ideas, but without upsetting the mob, as he refers to. And I thought that was the main point. The rest were just sort of supporting ideas about why would that be necessary. That was my feeling regarding this letter.
Very well said. I think you captured it well. So thank you for those comments. And thank you again for reading. Angel.
Oh yeah, that what Mona was saying, I was going to just ask the same question, the title. And
Right.
one thing in that there seems to be a contrast between private and public, and he's saying there might be some virtues in going to the private. And the first reaction I think some Stoics might have is, but isn't there a social aspect to being a Stoic? Isn't there an aspect of, it's not just getting away from the world, but being in the world, especially with others? And so the concern about politics, but he uses these various interesting situations where, Caesar and Pompey, upsetting that, and he uses those particular examples in peculiar cases that it might be, in fact, wiser to be private than public in this sort of way, which is kind of I found that to be a little bit awkward. And as far as one of the other points, one of the last points about riches is also an expression of public in one sense as well. So the body politic, safety, philosophy you take refuge in, all these seems to be going away privately, and the riches as well privately, not expression of wealth. So I think there was a contrast between the public and the private, and the examples he uses of public or non-private is kind of interesting. The only one I would be a little bit concerned with is the role that Stoics play with respect to being social, especially in the domain of justice.
Very good comment. Thank you. Next up, we'll go to Penny.
Well, I was thinking too, as I said, about the reasons for withdrawing from the world. And I thought it was interesting in the first one, it talked about the body, as they said. And then he says, but you must be prepared when reason, self-respect, and duty demand the sacrifice to deliver it over to the flames. So they're clearly saying that, the body is important, but it's secondary to maintaining yourself as an individual and maintaining the beliefs that you have and acting with those beliefs. If your beliefs go against something for the body, then you have to give up the body. And several people have said, and when I was reading it, I was kind of struck by when they're talking about protecting yourself from the mob and what you could fear, that these times were really, quite violent, and talking about some of the horrible punishments that they gave to people, and that these are things that are just part of their daily life, basically. And kind of elevated, for me, the violence that men give against violence, when he's talking about the things to fear, want, sickness, and violence. Just it kind of elevated it from the normal things that I would think of that you would be afraid of, to a whole new level. And I was kind of glad that, at least in my life, I'm living in a more peaceful era where even when people are exerting power over others, they generally don't do it in such a horrible manner. And I was interested again that when you talked about, the world and politics can be a very perilous place. So you should, basically take your refuge in philosophy. And that should be, which relating to the thing I think he said at the top with the reason and self-respect, that's the source of your reason and self-respect, is you following your personal, philosophy. And I was intrigued at the end when they were talking in number 16, which reminded so much of when we studied the Gita. And finally, the wise man regards the reason for his actions, but not the results. The beginning is in our own power. Fortune decides the issue, but I do not allow her to pass sentence upon myself. So there's so much in the Gita about not being tied to attached to things, to rid yourself of attachments. And this is basically exactly the same thing, saying, okay, why you're acting, and that's what you can control. And so you start out and you should always do the actions that you feel you should be doing. And after that, you really, whatever the result is, you cannot determine that. So I just was very intrigued that this philosophy was so much like, the one from the Gita. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for everyone for your comments. Yeah, I mean, I think that Mona, that you did capture it well. That this is predominantly a letter that is about withdrawing from society and essentially thinking about the political influence that you can have as not necessarily a member of the Senate, a formal member of the Senate. And also the deep introspection that comes from withdrawing is a very important point. That what philosophy provides you with, the insights that allow you to come up with ideas that that are in the best kind of interest of everyone involved. I do very much appreciate, Penny, what you highlighted, is that the beginning of, basically, I was at I'm trying to look, it's essentially, you may say, but she can inflict a measure of suffering and of trouble. The highwayman does not pass sentence when he slays. Wait a minute, that's maybe not the line I was looking for. I was looking for the line essentially where it was tied for outcomes. I think it was number 15. I can't find it at the moment. Hang on. At the beginning of power is fortune decides the issue, but I do not allow her to pass sentence upon myself. That was the line that I was looking for. Yeah, I mean, I think that is critical because it's the idea of working within what is in your control, and that's Epictetus' fundamental rule, where Stoics only focus on what they can do, not necessarily the outcomes themselves. So good comments, everybody. So with that, why don't we take a vote for Maritza? Go.
Sorry, just really quick, just two things. I was just thinking that what you were just saying made me think of the final idea of what Seneca's trying to tell us is the idea of self-mastery here, like of, kind of governing ourselves and looking at the idea of withdrawing from the world, not mean like literally going into the woods, but of being to withdraw from needing too many things and from looking at being content. And I get the overall feeling what he's urging us to consider here is that contentment is greater than consumption.
A bit of the inner citadel, so to speak. So, okay, very good. So with that, why don't we take a vote now or we could just move on. We could take another vote, or we could just move on to what had the second most votes, which was number 13. And then because the third letter there would be a number of them at 3. So shall we take another vote or not?
What we did last time, Joe, was we went with the ones that were the highest, and then we just voted for the ones with the ties at the end.
Okay, so we'll wait we'll go ahead with number 13 then. Do I have a volunteer to read? Vinny, thank you.
I'm going to read from my screen, so give me 1 second.
Yeah, it's a little easier.
Okay, so
If anybody wants, if we want to split this up, because these are actually much longer than the ones we had covered on Friday evening. So I didn't realize, apologies, Mona, that you were going to read 17 passages. So is there anybody else that would also like to take over at, number 8?
Penny did raise her hand.
Okay, so Penny, would you mind taking over at number 8? And can you see the screen?
You're on mute.
Okay, yes, that would be fine.
All right, so I'm reading 1 to 7.
Correct.
Okay. Number 13, on groundless fears. I know that you have plenty of spirit, even before you began to equip yourself with maxims, which were wholesome and potent to overcome obstacles. You were taking pride in your contest with fortune. And this is all the more true now that you have grappled with fortune and tested your powers. For our powers can never inspire us implicit faith. I'm sorry. For our powers can never inspire in us implicit faith in ourselves, except when many difficulties have confronted us on this side and on that, and have occasionally even come close to quarters with us. It is only in this way that the true spirit can be tested. The spirit that will never consent to come under the jurisdiction of things external to ourselves. This is the touchstone of such a spirit. No prize fighter can go with high spirits into the strife if he has never been beaten black and blue. The only contestant who can confidently enter the list is the man who has seen his own blood, who has felt his teeth rattle beneath his opponent's fist, who has been tripped and felt the full force of his adversary's charge, who has been downed in body but not in spirit, one who, as often as he falls, rises again with greater defiance than ever. So then, to keep up my figure, fortune has often been has often in the past got the upper hand of you. Yet you have not surrendered, but have leaped up and stood your ground still more eagerly. For manliness gains much strength by being challenged. Nevertheless, if you approve, allow me to offer some additional safeguards by which you may fortify yourself. There are more things, Lucilius, likely to frighten us than there are to crush us. We suffer more from it more often in imagination than in reality. I am not speaking with you in the Stoic strain, but in my milder style. For it is our Stoic fashion to speak of all those things which provoke cries and groans as unimportant and beneath notice. But you and I must drop such great sounding words, although heaven knows they are true enough. What I advise you to do is not be unhappy before the crisis comes, since it may be that the damage before which you have paled as if as if they were threatening you will never come upon you. They certainly have not come yet. Accordingly, some things torment us more than they ought. Some torment us before they ought. Some torment us when they ought not to torment us at all. We are in the habit of exaggerating or imagining or anticipating sorrow. The first of these three faults may be postponed in the present because the subject is under discussion and the case is still in court, so to speak. That which I should call a trifling, you will maintain to be the most serious. For of course, I know that some men laugh while being flogged, and that others wince at a box on the ear. We shall consider later whether these evils derive their power from their own strength or from our own weakness. Do me a favor. When men surround you and try to talk you into believing that you are unhappy, to consider not what you're here, but what you yourself feel, and to take counsel with your feelings and question yourself independently because you know your own affairs better than anyone else does. Ask, Is there any reason why these persons should condole with me? Why should they be worried or even fear some infection from me, as if troubles could be transmitted? Is there any evil involved, or is it a matter merely of ill report rather than evil? Put the question voluntarily to yourself. Am I tormented without sufficient reason? Am I morose? And do I convert what is not an evil into what is an evil? You may retort with the question, how am I to know whether my sufferings are real or imaginary? Here is the rule for such matters. We are tormented either by things present or by things to come or by both. As to things present, the decision is easy. Suppose that your person enjoys freedom and health, and that you do not suffer from any external injury. As to what may happen in the future, we shall see later on. Today, there is nothing wrong with it.
Thank you. Penny,
But you say something will happen to it. First of all, consider whether your proofs of future trouble are sure. For it is more often the case that we are troubled by our apprehensions, and that we are mocked by that mocker, rumor, which is wont to settle wars, but much more often settles individuals. Yes, my dear Lucilius, we agree too quickly with what people say. We do not put to the test those things which cause our fear. We do not examine into them. We blench and retreat just like soldiers who are forced to abandon their camp because of a dust cloud raised by stampeding cattle, or are thrown into a panic by the spreading of some authentic, I can't say that word right now, authenticated rumor. And somehow or other, it is the idle report that disturbs us most. For truth has its own definite boundaries, but that which arises from uncertainty is delivered over to guesswork and the irresponsible license of a frightened mind. That is why no fear is so ruinous and so uncontrollable as panic fear. For other fears are groundless, but this fear is witless. Let us then look carefully into the matter. It is likely that some troubles will befall us, but it is not a present fact. How often has the unexpected happened? How often has the unexpected never come to pass? And even though it is ordained to be, what does it avail to run out to meet your suffering? You will suffer soon enough when it arrives. So look forward meanwhile to better things. What should you gain by doing this? Time. There will be many happenings meanwhile, which will serve to postpone or end or pass on to another person the trials which are near or even in your very presence. A fire has opened the way to flight. Men have been let down softly by a catastrophe. Sometimes the sword has been checked even at the victim's throat. Men have survived their own executioners. Even bad fortune is fickle. Perhaps it will come, perhaps not. In the meantime, it is not. So look forward to better things. The mind at times fashions for itself all shapes of evil when there are no signs that point to any evil. It twists into the worst construction some word of doubtful meaning, or it fancies some personal grudge to be more serious than it really is, considering not how angry the enemy is, but to what lengths he may go if he is angry. But life is not worth living, and there is no limit to our sorrows if we indulge our fears to the greatest possible extent. In this matter, let prudence help you, and contend with a resolute spirit even when it is in plain sight. If you cannot do this, counter one weakness with another. and temper your fear with hope. There is nothing so certain among these objects of fear that it is not more certain still that things we dread sink into nothing, and that things we hope for mock us. Accordingly, weigh carefully your hopes as well as your fears, and whenever all the elements are in doubt, decide in your own favor. Believe what you prefer. And if fear wins a majority of the votes, incline in the other direction anyhow, and cease to harass your soul, reflecting continually that most mortals, even when no troubles are actually at hand or are certainly to be expected in the future, become excited and disquieted. No one calls a halt on himself when he begins to be urged ahead, nor does he regulate his alarm according to the truth. No one says, the author of the story is a fool, and he who has believed it is a fool, as well as he who fabricated it. We let ourselves drip with every breeze. We are frightened at uncertainties, just as if they were certain. We observe no moderation. The slightest thing turns the scales and throws us forthwith into a panic. But I am ashamed either to admonish you sternly or to try to beguile you with such mild remedies. Let another say, perhaps the worst will not happen. You yourself must say, well, what if it does happen? Let us see who wins. Perhaps it happens for my best interest. It may be that such a death, will shed credit upon my life. Socrates was ennobled by the hemlock draught, wrenched from Cato's hand, his sword, the vindicator of liberty, and you deprive him of the greatest share of his glory. I'm exhorting you far too long, since you need reminding rather than exhortation. The path on which I am leading you is not different from that on which your nature leads you. You were born to such conduct as I described. Hence, there is all the more reason why you should increase and beautify the good that is in you. But now to close my letter, I have only to stamp the usual seal upon it. In other words, to commit therefore some noble message to be delivered to you. The fool, with all other faults, has this also. He is always getting ready to live. Reflect, my esteemed Lucilius, what this saying means, and you will see how revolting it is, the fickleness of men who lay down every day new foundations of life and begin to build up fresh hopes even at the brink of the grave. Look within your own mind for individual instances. You will think of old men who are preparing themselves at that very hour for a political career, or for travel, or for business. And what is baser than getting ready to live when you are already old? I should not name the author of this motto, except that it is someone unknown to fame and is not one of those popular sayings of Epicurus which I have allowed myself to praise and to appropriate. Farewell.
Thank you so much, Penny. So with that, I will open it up for comments on letter 13. Feel free to type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Ebony.
I have to say, I really like this one. And I think it's because I think, Seneca here admonished, warns us about, fearing things before they come. And it's so funny, when I think of resilience in the Stoics, one of the practices is to anticipate, how you would feel if this thing happened, or preparing, hoping for the best kind of and preparing for the worst. And in my mind, it seems like there's a conflict, but then when I think about it a little more as I read through, I think there's a difference between preparing yourself for things that could happen and fearing those things. And I think when you live in fear, it doesn't allow you to prepare. You just sit there and you just worry about it and you let the fear take over. And now the fear controls you rather than you seeing what you could do to what you can do to control the situation. And I think resilience is different, and preparing for the worst is that, it's kind of like I always say preparing your house for a hurricane when you know you live somewhere near where hurricanes happen. And so you may, if you can, you may structure your house so that, you can proof it for a hurricane, but you also buy the insurance and you also have things prepared during hurricane season. That way, if you need to leave, you can leave. And so in that sense, you are keeping yourself safe and as safe as possible. But when you sit there in fear and you're living in a hurricane region and you're like, oh, there's nothing I can do. I don't know if I'm gonna have insurance. I don't know if I'm gonna, then you're just fearing what may not even come. Or if you're one of those people that you're fearing hurricane, but you live in Philadelphia, right? Um, the chances of the hurricane doing much damage, if there is one, is slim. And so you're not near a shore area or anything like that. You may have some flooding, but that's it. But you spend your time ruminating over this. And I think we can all learn from this. And, even in today's society, when you talk about the news and all you see is fear of things that could happen in the city, you could almost live, you can almost live in a bubble and never leave your house. But are you really living when you do that? Or are you just letting fear control? So I think I love this overall passage because I think you torture yourself when you just allow fear to control. And I think once you learn how to deal with the fear and you ask yourself the questions that Seneca requests you to ask, which is, you know, is this fear real? Like, is it in reality? Is it happening to you right now? And if you can answer those questions, no, then, you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief. It doesn't mean that anything bad won't happen to you. We are all living this out life and all of these things could happen, but to fear them, the thing that hasn't come yet, you just live more time in fear than when the thing is actually happening to you. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Avanique. Next up, we have Amjel.
Oh, I just wanted to, I'm just trying to think of an example. It's hard for me to relate to some of the examples he's giving to, but suppose you're in the middle of the night and you're in your room, and you're sleeping and you hear something in the house. And, so you're feeling a little bit distressed perhaps. And you may feel, and you think about, okay, well, maybe it's the cat that's knocked over the lamp. That would settle my distress in one sense. Maybe I'll get angry at the cat, but the other is that there's a robber in the house. Now, it seems to me that that's pretty realistic. That could be a real thing. So it seems somewhat normal to think that there's a robber in the house. So what I'm not clear about is how you should react to that. And from what I take it is that you should, you have some options, right? You can, instead of letting maybe the emotion overwhelm you, so you don't think about it, maybe you can, okay, if it is a robber, what could I do? I call 911 or grab my bat or, wake up the kids or take them downstairs, do something, and that seems to me an act of caution, to settle your fear, in that sense, because there's a prospect of someone in the house. So it seems like being cautious would make more sense to me in a rational way. I just had a hard time understanding his examples.
Thank you, Amjad. Maritza.
So I'm gonna sidestep what I was initially going to say and the idea I would like to just respond to Amjo. So I just want to maybe invite you to remember the title of this letter, On Groundless Fears. It seems to me that if one hears a crash or a noise or a broken window sound in one's house, it is not groundless to have a fear that that something is amiss, something is not right, something is not normal. So it wouldn't necessarily fall into this category. It's caution to think that it's a robber instead of thinking that it's a cat, sure. But because there's already an outside occurrence, it's not necessarily groundless. I think perhaps if one were to hear a noise today and the window was broken, it turns out it was your cat. But now every time you hear a noise, you assume that it's a robber breaking in, even if it's not the same occurrence. Maybe that slides into the realm of a groundless fear. And that gets us towards the end of the letter where he's talking about when the fear begins to control you. Because I think that he walks us through this progression, of like, I guess, manners of fears. And he talks, first he's talking to us about when we're worrying about whether or not that other shoe is going to drop, right? And then he cautions us to question our own fear and to question the source of it. And I think that's where this questioning of the sound and where that comes in. It's the idea of, so where did the fear come from? And you're going to say, like, downstairs from the window, right? Is it valid? I mean, it actually was a sound. Your hearing is not failing you. So I think it's valid to have a fear of an unknown sound. And is it real? So if it's actually a thing, sure, that's real. But so to me, if those are all true statements, then it slides out of the realm of groundless, and it no longer is that of which he's speaking. But I think the caution that he's saying here is that when we allow a situation like that to become the foundation for future perceived fears that are now groundless in nature, because we don't have an actual threat as we did in that first occurrence. That's just kind of how my take on your question there, Amjo. Joe, if it's okay, I wanted to say something else, but I wanted to stop now and let Amjo reply.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
That's okay. Did that make sense to you?
I'm not sure. I think he's saying don't have any fear. Usually they don't.
I don't get that at all. No, because
we replace fear with caution. I mean, I do think maybe there are cases where immediate, just naturally we do have these certain sort of loud sounds or something like that. We kind of shriek and like that.
I would disagree.
I don't think that he's imagining that. It seems like he doesn't make a case for fear at all, and it seems to me that it's not clear how we're supposed to overcome. I think we just overcome it by thinking it through. He's thinking that maybe our imagination gets away from us. I think it's.
I think again
imagination plays, but I think imagination is the right thing to use because it's the right thing to be cautious with. Suppose there was a robber, then I can react appropriately. But just being lost in fear, like, oh, what do I do? Oh my gosh. I think he would say just that's probably not going to be very helpful.
That I would agree with, but I would again remind you that he's speaking of groundless fears. So in this letter, if you get the feeling that he's saying have no fear, that's not, I would not disagree with that, because what he's saying is have no groundless fears. He is acknowledging that fears are going to happen because, he says, he does say that, you know, you will suffer soon enough. And when it arrives. So look forward, meanwhile, to better things. Even bad fortune is fickle. Perhaps it will come, perhaps not. In the meantime, it is not. So that there is the invitation to shift one's perspective so that one is not stuck in the groundless fear. And I think what he's alluding to also is if we can strengthen our muscle with groundless fears in so much that we don't get stuck and allowing fear to control us when it is a grounded fear, as in a robbery, you have the fortitude of mind with which to react appropriately. Because if one fails to consider ever that we could find ourselves in that situation, we're going to be, you know, unable to use any type of reason. At least that's what I think he's alluding to, that if we can school ourselves with groundless fears and temper those to not let them control us, then we find ourselves, I mean, it's like a cascading good, because you can, if you shift your perspective, so you attempt to look forward to better things, as he phrases it, you know, you have less fear, because the requirement, as I'm reading it here, for this groundless fear is an inward looking, right? You're failing to see a bigger picture. You're failing to see the future, and you're failing to see the present as it stands right now. And he's inviting you in this very moment. You're safe. You're warm. Sure, somebody might throw a brick through your window in the next minute, but in this minute right now, you have your fuzzy slippers on. Life is good. So right now, and that's a really ridiculous example, I know, but in the right now, go ahead and be calm and look forward to the next minute, because the next minute's going to come regardless, and you can't predict what the next minute will bring. So why not walk forward with the thought in mind that the next minute will be a calm one, as opposed to one that will bring massive amounts of fear.
Thank you, Maritza. So why don't we go next to Mona, and then we'll go to Carly, and then we'll go to Penny.
Yeah, what I wanted to say is similar to what Maritza touched upon, because my feeling was that he was pointing that our biggest trouble is that we can't stand uncertainty. So then we fill in the gaps, like we kind of create scenarios which are unrealistic, or, you know, we obviously don't have a clear sense of what's happening when we sort of imagine the worst. And again, my feeling was that the call was for just coming back to the present and then just see what's happening here, because that's what's actually can be seen, right? Rather than imagined. So, and keeping in touch with what's real. That was my understanding of this passage, although it was not, you know, clearly stated this way, but.
Yeah, I think if you were to look for numbers, let me see, number 7, I think a lot of the answers are actually held in that particular passage. You know, you may retort with the question, how am I to know whether my sufferings are real or imaginary? Here is the rule for such matters. We are tormented either by things present or by things to come, or by both. As to things present, the decision is easy. Suppose that person enjoys freedom and health, and that you do not suffer from any external injury. As to what apprehensions, and that we are mocked, external, as to what may happen to it in the future, we shall see later on. Today, there is nothing wrong with it. So that's I think number 7 actually clears up a lot of it, it's this idea of imaginary fears that we suffer in our minds more in our imaginations than we do in reality. And this actually is part of living in the present moment. So I think that that's key. I think also number 9 is key, but I don't want to take up too much time. I just want to make a clarity on this point. So we can go to Carly, followed by Mona. Or Penny, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Can you hear me better now?
Yes,
Great. Okay. Yeah, really good points that have been made. I think the idea of being stuck in fear is something that it seems like Seneca is speaking to in many passages back and forth. The ones that struck me were about the spirit, you know, how we confront difficulties, and that what is exaggerated and external to us is oftentimes imagined. It is not actually in existence. Speaking more specifically on, like, I think it was number 5 and number 6 that play on the notion of time, that oftentimes we get upset before we ought to, as if trouble were here already, when in fact it's not. Nothing is actually certain to come to pass. Let's see. Oh, I like the passage that said, we shall consider later whether these evils drive from their own power or their strength, or from our weakness, and that it's wise to look into the self, you know, without sufficient reason. That this really struck me as a main Stoic point that he makes, that you will suffer soon enough. Like, life is going to happen and you'll be suffering. Being prepared for it will help ease that suffering when that comes to pass. But staying stuck in that fear or in that worry is meaningless. So look forward to better things. The trials which are near, or even in your very sight, are what matters. So fire opens up a way, people have survived, you know, nothing is set and it's not even here yet. I also was sort of struck to Amjal's point about how is it that we overcome fear. And I don't know that he speaks to it other than that mindfulness of being aware of time, that right now you're safe, and that, you know, preparing for a disaster may be a good idea so that you're not overcome by that surprise. But on the other hand, expecting the disaster is where we get stuck. And I think that Stoicism actually was a precursor for CBT, for how people actually do deal with their kind of fears and where they get stuck. Anyway, the last point I wanted to make was about the seriousness that he speaks to, about, again, the external factors of reputation or rumors, our attachment to what is not actually in existence, be it a personal grudge or reputation or any kind of calamity. That the saddest thing is that, you know, there's no limit to our sorrows if life isn't worth living. And that's sort of the illusion to being stuck in that worry and in that mindset of not being present in the here and now, but stuck in what might happen. I have a lot more notes, but I will let somebody else speak. Thank you.
Are you referring to, just for a point of clarification, to number 9 on your last comment?
Oh, let's see. Oh, number 9 is about the panic fear, and that being the worst. I think he mentions actually even later than that, about in maybe 14.
For truth
12.
has its own definite boundaries. Or you're reading that? But that
No, I
which
think it was-
arises from uncertainty is delivered over to guesswork and the irresponsible license of a frightened mind.
Yeah.
That is
He's-
why no fear. That is why no fear is so ruinous and so uncontrollable as panic fear. For other fears are groundless, but this fear is witless. And that is the idea that you are giving into deception or rumor. You know, for truth has no definite boundaries.
Yeah, it was
Unless you
actually
saw
number
that, unless you saw that in another section.
I see that in section 12, about midway through. But life is not worth living, and there's no limit to our sorrows if we indulge in our fears to the greatest possible extent. In this matter, let prudence help you, and condemn with a resolute spirit, even when it is in plain sight. Oh, I like that. Let me add on to that too. That's sort of the idea of having a mentor, of it's spoken about in other letters too, about somebody to whom you look up and respect and imagine as if they were judging you all the time or peering over your shoulder. That idea of, would your fear be reasonable? You heard a sound and somebody's in the house, versus something that you might come up with your own narrative about a potential future that's not even here yet, or some sort of fear about reputation or outcome, rather than living in the moment, which is the only thing you have agency over. I'll find a couple more quotes just to put in the chat later that struck me.
Thank you. So next up, we'll go to Penny.
Okay. Well, I had a story for Joel, which I just had to say because you were talking. It relates to groundless fears, but this story. Many years ago, my family was all on vacation. It was summer. I had the windows open. I was sleeping, and I got woken by the music box in my daughter's bedroom was going off. And I was totally terrified because I knew I was all alone in the house. And somebody obviously was in the bedroom, had knocked the shelf and started the music box playing. But I was kind of like, okay, I'm just not going to lie here in this bed until somebody appears in the doorway, which will be even more frightening. So I got up and I walked down the hallway and I walked into the room and there was nobody there. There was nobody in the house. I walked all through the house. The music box somehow had just started playing on its own. But this kind of reminds me a little of this, the story about the groundless fears, because even though I was convinced in my mind at that time, and there was something that was happening, the music box was playing, there was nobody in the house. So I think that what they're saying, when there's a real thing that's happening, you're going to deal with it. So, but even when you think there might be a real thing happening, it might not be, it's imaginary. And so I just thought what he said was very true, that we are more likely to be frightened by things that we imagine than real things. And that, we really, as he said, you should take the time to examine what you're thinking about. And if it's not based on absolute fact that something is happening to you at the moment, then you should step back and try to just be calm and relaxed and say, okay, things are okay right now. I know something is going to happen to me in my life, but be calm and relaxed about it. So I just thought that was a very good attitude, because I myself feel, I have often said, the things I've worried about the most are never the things that are the worst things that happen in my life. Something that you don't think about at all is what really is the worst. Like, one day your sister calls up and says she has lung cancer. No, I have not been sitting worrying about that. I've been worrying about the kids might get in car accidents or all kinds of things. So I really feel this is the case, that most of what we're afraid of is groundless. And that if you can realize that and try to live to avoid groundless fears, you're going to be much better off.
Conquer fear with a rational thought. I think that sums it up. So with that, why don't we vote on the final letter that we can actually, we will read this evening, maybe the final letter. I'm guessing it would be. So if everybody puts their desired letter that they would like to read in the chat, then we can go ahead and tally it up and then go from there.
Joe, which are the three we're voting on?
I was going to let anybody just vote for whatever they wished.
Oh, I thought it was the three. I thought it was the three that had the most votes.
So there's 11, 16, and 20 are the ones with three. Okay, I have 2 for 11. One for 16. I'll give it another 30 seconds just for people to vote. I got 2 for 16. I have 3 for 16. All right, let's go to number 16. Maybe not in America, but you do here, Eleanor. But so, in any case, do I have any volunteers to read number 16? Carly, let me see how long. I forget this one is. They're all long this week.
Yeah.
So, do you want to read to number 7
4
as
or
well?
5. Okay.
There's
And
only
quick
9
check.
in this one, right?
Yeah.
That's no, I believe. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. There's only 9.
Oh, okay. I was on the wrong letter there. Yeah. Oh, so there is 9. I mean, if you feel free to, go ahead and read the whole thing. I mean, if you wish, but if not, then you could read the number 4 or 5.
Okay.
We can take it from there.
Let's see how well my microphone and such is going to work. Can everybody hear me clearly? Okay. Tell me if I need to speak up. Basically, I have number 1. It is clear to you, I am sure, Lucilius, that no man can live a happy life or even a supportable life without the study of wisdom. You know also that a happy life is reached when our wisdom is brought to completion, but that life is at least endurable even when our wisdom has only begun. This idea, however, clear though it is, must be strengthened and implanted more deeply by daily reflection. It is more important for you to keep the resolutions you have already made than to go on and make noble ones. You must persevere, must develop new strength by continuous study until that which is only a good inclination becomes a good settled purpose. 2. Hence, you no longer need to come to me with much talk and protestations. I know that you have made great progress. I understand the feelings which prompt your words. They're not feigned or specious words. Nevertheless, I shall tell you what I think, that at present I have hopes for you, but not yet perfect trust. And I wish that you would adopt the same attitude towards yourself. There's no reason why you should put confidence in yourself too quickly and readily. Examine yourself, scrutinize and observe in divers ways, but mark, before all else, whether it is in philosophy or merely in life itself that you have made progress. 3. Philosophy is no trick to catch the public. It is not devised for show. It is a matter not of words, but of facts. It is not pursued in order that the day may yield some amusement before it is spent, or that our leisure may be relieved of tedium that irks us. It molds and constructs the soul. It orders our life, guides our conduct, shows us what we should do and what we should leave undone. It sits at the helm and directs our course as we waver amid uncertainties. Without it, no one can live fearlessly or in peace of mind. Countless things that happen every hour call for advice, and such advice is to be sought in philosophy. Perhaps someone will say, how can philosophy help me if fate exists? Of what avail is philosophy if God rules the universe? Of what avail it is if chance governs everything? For not only is it impossible to change things that are determined, but it is also impossible to plan beforehand against what is undetermined. Either God has forestalled my plans and decided what I am to do, or else fortune gives no free play to my plans. 5. Whether the truth, Lucilius, lies in one or in all of these views, we must be philosophers. Whether fate binds us down in inexorable law, or whether God, as arbiter of the universe, has arranged everything, or whether chance drives and tosses human affairs without method, philosophy ought to be our defense. She will encourage us to obey God cheerfully, but fortune defiantly. She will teach us to follow God and endure chance. 6. Shall I continue or should we pause here?
Does anybody else wish to read, or I mean, I can take over, or
No, I'm
go
fine.
ahead. Okay, go ahead.
6. But it is not my purpose now to be led into a discussion as to what is within our control. If foreknowledge is supreme, or if a chain of fated events drags us along in its clutches, or if the sudden and unexpected play of the tyrant over us, I return now to my warning and my exhortation that you should not allow the impulse of your spirit to weaken and grow cold. Hold fast to it and establish it firmly, in order that what is now impulse may become a habit of the mind. 7. If I know you well, you have already been trying to find out from the very beginning of my letter what little contribution it brings to you. Sift the letter and you will find it. You need not wonder any genius of mine, for as yet I am lavish only with other men's property. But why did I say other men? Whatever is well said by anyone is mine. There's also a saying of Epicurus, if you live according to nature, you will never be poor. If you live according to opinion, you will never be rich. 8. Nature's wants are slight, the demands of opinion are boundless. Suppose that the property of millionaires is heaped upon your possession. Assume that fortune carries you far beyond the limits of a private income, decks you with gold, clothes you in purple, and brings you to such a degree of luxury and wealth that you can bury the earth under your marble floors, that you may not only possess, but tread upon riches. And statues, paintings, whatever any art has devised for the satisfaction of luxury, you will only learn from such great things to crave still greater. 9. Natural desires are limited, but those which spring from false opinion can have no stopping point. The false has no limits. When you're traveling on a road, there must be an end. But when astray, your wanderings are limitless. Recall your steps, therefore, from idle things. And when you would know whether that which you seek is based upon a natural or upon a misleading desire, consider whether it can stop at any definite point. If you find, after having traveled far, that there is more distant goal always in view, you may be sure that this condition is contrary to nature. Farewell.
Thank you very much. So go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat, or raise your hand in Zoom if you wish to comment on letter 16. Go ahead, Martha.
So my favorite line is, the if you live according to nature, you'll never be poor. I think that that's just a beautiful, beautiful line. And I would tandem it with the one that comes a little further and say, if you live according to opinion, you'll never be rich. I don't think he phrases it exactly like that, but just my thought. This letter made me think of Pierre Hadot, actually, and the philosophy is a way of life. The concept of philosophy is a mode of life, an act of living, and a way of being. And that's what I hear him saying here. I like the way he begins the letter, where he's talking about, it's clear that no man can live a happy life or even a supportable life without the study of wisdom. And I think that is, it's so very true. It's what we do here, right? The concept of being the perpetual learner is our way towards walking that forward, meaningful path, right? We seek wisdom perpetually, and that's how we seek to improve ourselves, strengthen our own value system and be true to our morals is through this learning process. And so I see him stating that very explicitly here. And that's another thing I noticed in this letter. I don't see as often in the letters of the other letters of his where he's so very explicit in the way he begins it. Like it's very, there's no margin for wonder in here. He just puts all the cards on the table in the beginning. And then he goes on and explains that just statement of fact. And I like the idea of where he goes down at the bottom and speaks of, not being so sure of yourself. And that brings to mind, the statement that Shrikant often says to us about, strong opinions, loosely held. I think that that's what he's speaking of when he says to Lucius that, he doesn't quite, trust in him, or I forget exactly the way he puts it, but right, he says, I have hopes for you, but not yet perfect trust. And I wish that you would adopt the same attitude towards yourself. There is no reason why you should put confidence in yourself too quickly and readily. And I think that those are words for us to really live by. I don't think we hold that in mind enough. The need to caution our own judgment about our own trustworthiness, maybe, as it were. Like, we are the unreliable narrator. For those of you who are writers or write, that's who we are. We're the unreliable narrator, but we tend to forget that often. So I like this call to remind us that we should question everything in our quest for wisdom, including ourselves. And I think that's just great. Thank you.
Hey, you bring up a very important point. Maybe it's a question that other people can answer, is the idea of what does it mean to pursue wisdom in a practical sense as a Stoic. So I put the question out to anybody that wishes to answer it. So, Maritza put a great point on the table about wisdom, but what does it actually mean to pursue it? So does anybody else have any comments? Go ahead, Carly.
Pursuing wisdom is fascinating to, me personally, but the Stoics. It also seemed to allude back to kind of Aristotelian nature of keeping people from being a sophist, that it needs to be a daily practice and thoughts that we keep at forefront. It's I guess, in some ways, to what we might consider modern day mindfulness, that wisdom comes in the awareness of. And so I think the past letter in particular touched on time, and that our relationship to things in the past, and inappropriate fears and unreasonable thoughts and such, that the wisdom part is about the habit of checking yourself, of looking inward and living by the 4 Stoic virtues with the moderation and judgment and such. But pursuing wisdom is actually a trait that I think he says in the very first part of this, it strengthens the soul. And it's meant to guide us and to prescribe how we should be. And we can strive towards something always in every action, in every moment.
Thank you, Carly. I don't see any other comments. But I think that it's an important question to consider because wisdom really is obviously one. Oh, well, okay. Let's hear from Amjol. I was waiting for you to raise your hand, Amjol. I was kind of thinking if anybody was going to jump in and answer the question, it would have been you.
I just wanted to ask a question more so than answer any sort of questions, but the number 6, I'm still a little bit unclear about. He talks a little bit about fate, and it seems like if everything is in fact fated,
Determinism, are you talking about?
Strong determinism, yeah. Then he's kind of does not want to talk about what is up to us, which seems, I think, it's an interesting move that he says, because that's exactly what I would think he wanted to talk about, because but even if it were fated, in this sort of strong way, we probably, and we don't know about it, then we still can live with that. I think that's what he's trying to get at. So you don't even have to, which is kind of an interesting idea. You don't even have to bring up this idea of the dichotomy of control or what's up to you, even if everything that, was fated in a strong deterministic manner, it's still possible to live, even a virtuous life. It's kind of interesting. I would think that one would find, the message of some sort of a positive in the aspect of what is up to us. But he makes a separate move. He doesn't even want to talk about that, which I thought that was kind of interesting. Maybe someone can say a little bit more about that.
No, very interesting. I mean, so what do you think about the spark of free will then? Is that what you're implying?
Yeah.
That
Well,
at that moment we have a
Yeah,
choice.
you would want him to say it. Yeah, usually some people think of Stoics as being some sort of compatibilist, with what is up to us.
Correct.
What is, we can find our way living in accordance to nature, right? But even if it's in that strong sense of, even if you did know or something, there's a still sort of way in which you can still have some sort of hope or grit in whatever hand that you're dealt in this life. It's just kind of interesting.
Good point. Carly.
I would sort of suggest that we read in, was it letter maybe 13, that he did specifically go into things that are in our control, about the physical body and with emotions and moderation, ideating the worst so that we can be cautious and prepared for something and then not worry about it. But in this, I've always gotten the idea that with Seneca in particular, the idea is on sort of a dichotomy between the external and the internal forces that we have. and that many of the things that act as internal forces, such as emotions, wants, desire, sicknesses, etc., are what we have agency to deal with. And those things that are external forces, such as fate and chance and God, the natural forces, are those that are going to be what they are, irrespective of how we act at all. And so the idea that I get here is, why live in accordance with, mentioning even other men? It's about living in accordance with nature, which is what you have right now at your agency. So worrying about things like externally, what other people's opinion is of you, or any of those riches, is kind of where we find fraught. What did she say? I lost it. Oh, you will still crave greater things if those are what bring you satisfaction, is the luxury. You will always be in want. And then in that other chapter we just read prior to this, he talks about, our wants and our sicknesses are two of the three things that we fear most, because the third is the trouble of choosing what that is.
So essentially get off the hedonic treadmill, essentially, is what you're saying. And number two is, I guess it gets back to the main point that you were making a little bit earlier, the idea of what is wisdom, right? Wisdom is looking internally in order to act out externally. So then that has become the idea of self-knowledge. And how does that then become practical? And that was the pursuit of wisdom, is that I was kind of trying to get at. Becoming practical, and that's where things like tools, like practical aspects of it, like the CBT tools that have been developed, is the idea of just journaling and understanding the self, being pro-social, getting feedback, receiving that feedback, being open to new ideas, not necessarily being dogmatic or deontological in your perspective on the world. Those are all things that we can do in order to incorporate feedback to understand ourselves better, so we could have wise action. That's just a thought. But nonetheless, that aside, there's the external part that you brought up. Where I guess if you're seeking pleasures, what was it? I forget what you said. Essentially, and we talked about this many times, even if we relate this to the Gita, or if we relate this to any of the religious texts that we've been talking about, when you seek things that take you away from your own personal nature, which are externals, then ultimately, and that could be another individual's opinion or whomever or whatever, that's what's stated here, but it could be anything. It could be material possessions that it will not necessarily lead to fulfilling life. So I think that's a very that's essentially how one would probably say, I would say, would pursue wisdom. And it goes into the plays a major part with Stoic cosmopolitanism as well. Because not only do you see yourself as an individual, but you see yourself as part of a greater whole. And in order to do that, you have to become as aware of your own patterns of behavior within that framework. So in any case, those are just some thoughts, but there are plenty of Stoic practices. The whole handbook for New Stoics is full of actual practical exercises. There's even another book, 365 Ways to Become More Stoic, that is out. That was recently published by Tim LeBron and Casey Robinson. And so that's another one. And both of them provide actual clinical examples of how to measure yourself, to look inwards, to figure out what is the root of your desires. And that is also true in Hinduism, is you're looking at the ego, right? You're looking at what is driving your personal desires. And this is very important because once we know that, once we know the root cause of that, then we can actually confront it. But the distinction I would make between a self-help approach versus a philosophy of life is the pursuit of virtue. So then that adds purpose, and there's a value on top of that. So, and that's a higher level. That's a philosophy. That's not merely just clinical sessions. Not that the both can't be, not that clinical sessions are helpful. Maritza.
I was, pondering your question, what is wisdom? And, again, this section makes me think a lot of Haddo. So I'm going back to him and, he states real wisdom does not merely cause us to know, it makes us be in a different way. And I think that ties into what you were just speaking of how it comes from within. And and again, and this is, I'm quoting Haddo here, and he says, the goodness of our lives depends on our soul, in which we can make good use of other valuable things. And he says, but the condition of the soul is entirely a matter of developing and understanding fundamental truths about human nature. And as a consequence for those, about the nature of what is valuable for a human being. And I think that, if we are looking at from the Stoic lens, we fulfill our nature by pursuing a virtuous life. And if we're doing that, then our soul remains in a healthy state. And that's how we can continue to do this, developing and understanding of the fundamental truths, which would be the manner in which we accumulate said wisdom, that is what would become known as wisdom, at least how I would think of it. Just my 2 cents on trying to tackle your question, which is a really big question.
Yeah, I mean, the first line, changing your being, right? What was what he said?
Real wisdom, does not merely cause us to know, it makes us be in a different way. And I think it's exactly what he was saying there in the beginning.
Excellent point. Would anybody actually wish to read another letter? I'd be more than willing to engage with that. But if not, we can adjourn for the evening. But would anybody want to read another letter? Anybody up for that? We did have some that were tied at 3. So we also had letter 20 and letter 11. Carly wants 11. Okay. Again, I'm just, anybody that's willing to stick around. Amjol votes for 11. You're making me blush. So go ahead. Would anybody like to read number 11? Go ahead, Maritza.
Sure, I'll read it. You want to throw it up on the screen? I'll read it from mine, but just so folks can follow along.
Sure.
On the blush of modesty, letter 11. Your friend and I have had a conversation. He is a man of ability. His very first words showed what spirit and understanding he possesses and what progress he has already made. He gave me a foretaste, and he will not fail to answer thereto. For he spoke not from forethought, but was suddenly caught off his guard. When he tried to collect himself, he could scarcely banish that hue of modesty which is a good sign in a young man. The blush that spread over his face seemed so to rise from the depths. And I feel sure that his habit of blushing will stay with him after he has strengthened his character, stripped off all his faults, and become wise. For by no wisdom can natural weaknesses of the body be removed. That which is implanted and inborn can be toned down by training, but not overcome. Two, the steadiest speaker, when before the public, often breaks into a perspiration, as if he had wearied or overheated himself. Some tremble in the knees when they rise to speak. I know of some whose teeth chatter, whose tongues falter, whose lips quiver. Training and experience can never shake off this habit. Nature exerts her own power, and through such a weakness makes her presence known even in the strongest. 3, I know that the blush too is a habit of this sort, spreading suddenly over the faces of the most dignified men. It is indeed more prevalent in youth because of the warmer blood and the sensitive countenance. Nevertheless, both seasoned men and aged men are affected by it. Some are most dangerous when they redden, as if they were letting all of their sense of shame escape. Sulla, when the blood mantled his cheeks, was in his fiercest mood. Pompey had the most sensitive cast of countenance. He always blushed in the presence of a gathering, and especially at a public assembly. Fabianus also, I remember, reddened when he appeared as a witness before the Senate, and his embarrassment became him to a remarkable degree. 5, such a habit is not due to mental weakness, but to the novelty of a situation. An inexperienced person is not necessarily confused, but is usually affected because he slips into this habit by natural tendency of the body. Just as certain men are full-blooded, so others are of a quick and mobile blood that rushes to the face at once. 6, as I remarked, wisdom can never remove this habit. For if she could rub out all our faults, she would be mistress of the universe. Whatever is assigned to us by the terms of our birth and the blend in our constitutions will stick with us, no matter how hard or how long the soul may have tried to master itself. And we cannot forbid these feelings any more than we can summon them. Actors in the theater who imitate the emotions, who portray fear and nervousness, who depict sorrow, imitate bashfulness by hanging their heads, lowering their voices, and keeping their eyes fixed and rooted upon the ground. They cannot, however, muster a blush, for the blush cannot be prevented or acquired. Wisdom will not assure us of a remedy or give us help against it. It comes or goes unbidden and is a law unto itself. 8. But my letter calls for its closing sentence. Hear and take to heart this useful and wholesome model. Cherish some man of high character and keep him ever before your eyes, living as if he were watching you and ordering all your actions as if he beheld them. 9. Such, my dear Lucius, is the counsel of Epicurus. He has quite properly given us a guardian and an attendant. We can get rid of most sins if we have a witness who stands near us when we are likely to go wrong. The soul should have someone whom it can respect. one by whose authority it may make even its inner shrine more hallowed. Happy is the man who can make others better, not merely when he is in their company, but even when he is in their thoughts. And happy also is he who can so revere a man as to calm and regulate himself by calling him to mind. One who can so revere another will soon be himself worthy of reverence. 10. Choose therefore a Cato, or if Cato seems too severe a model, choose some Laiolus, a gentler spirit. Choose a master whose life, conversation, and soul-expressing face have satisfied you. Picture him always to yourself as your protector or your pattern. For we must indeed have someone according to whom we may regulate our characters. You can never straighten that which is crooked unless you lose a ruler. Farewell.
Thank you, Maritza. So anybody have any comments regarding number 11? No comments at all?
There's Avanique.
I didn't see that. Go ahead, Ebony.
I think the one thing I liked about this when Maritza read it was oh gosh, I just lost that thought in my head. It's the thought of the person that when Seneca says, you know, a mark of the good person is a person that not only makes you better when you're in their presence, but also when that person leaves, and you still think of them that, they have a good effect on you. And I think that's true. And I think part of it is reputation, but I don't like the word reputation because I think that is goes to outside influences. I think I think the word that I'm looking for is character, because I think the character of the person stays with you. If you know that person is a good person, you know that person has a good character, and it's not fake. It's not because you hear about that person. It could be, but it's not just because you hear about that person. It's that you know that person, and you know that person leaves a good feeling with everyone once that person leaves. And not only do you know it, but you know of other people that know it. I think that's a true mark of a good person. I think that's who we try to be. And it's not because they're trying to be the person that has this influence over another person. They're just being who they are. Like, they're being authentic. They're being themselves just by them being who they are and not caring about their reputation or what other people think of them or what other people say of them, because they know who they are. And they know that they're trying to pursue being a good person for them, for their own selves. I think that's a beautiful mark of a beautiful person. And I think it's the very meaning of a beautiful person, is someone that leaves a mark with you, whether they're there or not. And that because they're pursuing good themselves, for goodness sake, not for anything else. So I think I thought that was beautiful. That was a beautiful part of it, of that letter.
So I see we had Carly with her hand up, and then we'll go with Mona and Maritza, followed by Bill.
Thanks. Yeah, no, great points. Ebonique just made all my points. I do think that it's interesting to have a character to whom we look to, to venerate. And that the interesting thing is we now use the adjective character. oftentimes to mean that what constitutes a person, what makes them somebody who is respectable, and that the idea of keeping this person in mind as if they were a mentor, as if they were always with you, to whom you can pattern yourself after. And I think he says specifically, you know, according to whom we may regulate our characters, for you can never straighten that which is crooked unless you use a ruler. So it's the idea of having, people in mind, and not necessarily an external force, but have a model to which we can strive that is virtuous, to model our own behavior after.
Yeah, I mean, there's something called the sage on the shoulder is a Stoic practice that's regularly used, and it's basically you're thinking about that individual in a conscious way as to what types of decisions that they would make under certain circumstances. It doesn't necessarily have to be a specific individual. It could be a number of different individuals. But that is a practice to think about what a not a sage, I don't want to use that word, but what a role model would do. And I think that's important to have role models in your life to recognize. It also helps you recognize what other people do well and have, and what is truly praiseworthy within another individual. So with that, we'll go to Martha Murtha.
Thank you, Joe. I was called by this passage, number 7, that talks about actors in the theater. And to me, it sounded like he was trying to say blushing is a sign of something authentic, something that can be faked. If you look at someone, an actor would be able to fake pretty much everything else, right? They would imitate emotions, portray fear, nervousness, depict sorrow, imitate bashfulness, right? Lowering voices. So there's all sorts of ways to deceive, but not through blushing. So blushing is something authentic. And that happens to people who are of good character and people who are not of good character. So that's what felt more significant to me, that even can be like a way of looking into someone's soul, if you will, whether that's good or bad, not necessarily something calling for a particular character.
Very interesting observation. It's a very interesting observation. I mean, there's quotes in the chat about the sophists. And the sophists were actually just concerned with winning an argument. And they didn't necessarily care about the actual integrity of what they were trying to discover. It wasn't a genuine inquiry. It was just about being right, essentially. So they used rhetoric in order to prove their points. And what I would say to that is, it's very interesting. You link that to number 7. With the example of the actors, because there would be no shame in those individuals, and that's something that I find to be very interesting, is the lack of shame in an individual, and just to be right rather than to search for truth is just. Well, I mean, you're not authentic. Let's just say that. So, in any case, with that, Murtha.
I had to read this letter a few times. Initially, I was just very baffled by the first part. I felt like the first part just, I didn't quite get how it worked with the last, because 1 through 5 or 6 at least, you're like, what is happening here? And then it finally kind of clicked to me. I saw it, and it's that number 7 that Mona points out is I just realized I was reading it wrong, and I was missing what he was trying to say to me in this letter, or he wasn't saying it to me. He was saying it to Lucius, right? but eventually I got the whole point of this long, description about blushing and people who blush. It's not literally about the blushing, even though it is, because it's what Mona said right there right away. It's the this is one thing true that cannot be faked, and we should strive to make those our models. And like you just pointed out, Joe, that the sage on your shoulder is exactly this. You are finding the one who blushes. You're finding the one perceived true thing that cannot be faked, and using that as your guiding principle. And so eventually, after a couple versions of reading this, that's what I realized that's what he's saying to us, that and I think it's twofold too. It's like, that's the biggest thing he's saying is, find that guiding light. And somebody mentioned, you can never straighten that which is crooked unless you use a ruler. And again, so if you pick for your guiding principle a crooked stick, you're going to end up with a crooked line. So try to find the straightest one you can. That he's saying that, but also I think he's also telling us to forgive ourselves for some natural imperfections, like not literally the blushing, but it's kind of the thing of, because he calls it a natural weakness. He says, for by no wisdom can natural weaknesses of the body be removed. But I think what he's saying there is for us not to focus on a lack of perfection. And it's that thing, it's the concept of the sage is one that none of us is actually going to ever become a sage. But just because we know that for a fact doesn't mean that we should not, all of us, strive to be a sage and hold as a sage the person for whom we're setting our aim. I'm gunning for that person. I want to be that person, even though you're probably never ever going to make it. So that's what I hear in this section here, the twofold, the A, you want to choose that one thing that cannot be faked as your guiding light. And then the other side is that, none of us is actually ever without perfections. So don't waste time trying to eradicate them all for the semblance of some perceived perfection. Thanks, Joe.
We'll go to Carly and then Evanique, and then we'll close it for the evening.
Real briefly, beautiful points made. I think it was in the first section that he mentioned, first, second, or third, whatever. He talked about it section after section after section, which means that the fact that people blush might be seen, as was mentioned, as a weakness or a weakness in character. And the fact that it's authentic can be a marker of humility, which he states very clearly is a good thing, even though distinguished men and those that are used to the novelty might also blush, not due to mental weakness. But yeah, great points about looking for some man of high character and holding them near from that which can't be faked. I think seeking wisdom is very much about finding what is virtuous and coming back to character and that of humility and moderation. And what was the line about wisdom? Wisdom, for she, if she could rub out all of our faults, she would be mistress of the universe. That tends to imply that the embarrassment about embarrassment is, sorry, my neighbors. There is a lot of embarrassment about embarrassment, and to the point that there's kind of no need for that. It goes back to other letters that we've read in this particular section tonight about worrying and seeing what is a actual fear and something that's reasonable to focus on versus things that aren't. And blushing might be an indicator of that, that you want to notice in other people for their virtue.
Vinique.
Yeah, I just wanted to a couple points from what Maritza made. I think the part of forgiving yourself, I didn't see that when I read this initially, and I think it's true, like forgiving yourself for not, and I think it's forgiving yourself for the times where you are out of your character, and to see, not just to forgive yourself, but to see why you went where you didn't want to go. Like, why did you allow what someone said or what someone did? Why did you allow that to have you take an action that you wouldn't want to take? And then just question yourself about it. And the last point that Maritza made is about aiming to be the sage. And then my first initial question was like, well, why can't we be a sage, right? And then I thought about it. I guess it's not that we can't be a sage, but if that's your goal to be a sage, why are you trying to have that be your goal? Because when I think of a sage, I think of a person, because of who they are, people respect them, and people want to be like them, and people want to imitate them. But if your goal is to be a sage itself, it almost feels like you're going for a power grab, I guess. I don't know. It's just questions that I have, but I will leave it there.
Thank you, Vinique. Let me see. Are there any other exclamation points in the chat? No. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for staying a little bit later this evening. I very much appreciate it. You know, we got through 4 letters instead of the 3, and it's good to go through as many as possible so we can actually make connections between the letters as we go through them and talk them. You know. Share our thoughts on each one of these letters. I think we'll start to see a little bit more of a lot of connections in between each letter. I find it interesting, really quickly, is how often Epicurus is quoted. I think that that's a very interesting point. How he's integrating parts of Epicureanism into Stoic philosophy, which is you know, Marcus Aurelius does that too when it comes to pain. So that these philosophers do borrow good ideas from one another, and I still think that that's a good thing to do, is to borrow good ideas from other philosophies, as long as you have a framework to integrate it into, and it doesn't conflict with anything that was within that framework. So. Really quickly, I will just do some quick announcements for this upcoming week. Tomorrow we'll be doing I'm Coming to You, the Gospel of John, chapter 17, verses 6 through to 11. And we'll be right back here on Friday night. Stoicism, Seneca, Moral Letters, letters 21 through 30. I am looking forward to that. We have Asian philosophies on Saturday, Taoism, from Zhuangzi to cultivation of life. Sorry. And in our play series, gotta remember that. An Enemy of the People by Henrik Ibsen, and that is our every other week series that we're reading plays, and I think there's only a couple more weeks left after that. It's Saint Joan by George Bernard Shaw, and Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmund Rostand. And that is, I thought we had a Bucky meetup, and I'm pretty sure we do. I just don't have, hang on.
Yeah, when is that play on Sunday?
5 p.m. Okay, Joe Clinton will be joining us on Sunday evening. So I'm not exactly sure. He'll be going over of the jitterbug. Okay. How things fold in and expand, which is actually very interesting and important to understand when it comes to geometry. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. And I hope to see everybody at least Friday night, if not sooner. All right. Take care.